All right, so welcome back, everybody. We are looking at Chapter 4 today, which introduces the topic of the straw man. This is actually a pretty easy and quick chapter to get through. The straw man is labeled here as the second deadly fallacy. In other words, just as we saw the ad hominem being the most common fallacy committed by individuals, the straw man seems to be the second most common fallacy that's committed. And basically, let me start you off here. I've got a definition on the board here, so I'll just go ahead and bring this up so you can read it. And it says the straw man fallacy is to distort an opponent's argument in order to make it easier to attack. Okay? To distort an opponent's argument in order to make it easier to attack. So the idea behind the straw man fallacy is that you have your opponent, they've come up with an argument and you want to refute their position. The problem is that in trying to do so, maybe their argument is too good. Maybe you can't find flaws or faults with it. Maybe there's not some easily attackable way of going about it. And so what the person does is to create an alternative version of their opponent's argument. One that is full of holes, one that is very weak, one that's easy to attack and easy to tear down. That's all that the straw man is. If you think about where the terminology comes from, right? If you have a human being that you have constructed made out of straw, all it's going to take is a good gust of wind to knock that straw man over, right? A normal person is going to have enough weight and heft and ability behind them that they're going to be able to withstand a certain amount of pressure. But that being, that figure that's made completely out of straw, is going to topple very easily. And that's the idea behind the straw man fallacy. You have constructed an argument in such a way that it's full of holes, and it makes it very easy for your opponent to attack. The problem, of course, is, and this is why the straw man is always a fallacy, is because when you do this, you are not attacking the original argument. You're not actually destroying your opponent's position. You're just taking advantage of a weak link that you have created yourself. If you want to attack your opponent's argument directly, if you want to really refute them, you have to look at the argument that they are giving you. You want to look at what they say, and you want to attack that specific argument. But again, a lot of people, they think that's too much work, too much effort. Let me just give you a new version of my opponent's argument. Let me make it seem like they're much more radical than they really are, or maybe they're stupider than they really are, or maybe the logic behind their argument doesn't flow. But I'm going to, in some way or another, create this argument in such a way that it's going to begin to unravel itself, making it very easy for you to attack. But you don't want to do that, right? You don't want to do that. Let me give you still a couple examples here. Mr. Goldberg has argued against prayer in the public schools. Obviously, Mr. Goldberg advocates atheism, but atheism is what they used to have in Russia. Atheism leads to the suppression of all religions and the replacement of God by an omnipotent state. Is that what we want for this country? I hardly think so. Clearly, Mr. Goldberg's arguments are nonsense. So, we don't know what argument Mr. Goldberg originally made. We know that he's trying to argue that there should be no prayer in public schools. There's probably a lot of good reasons why a person might make an argument like that. To talk about the idea of how we should have separation of church and state, how public funds and money should not be supporting any specific religious traditions. There could be arguments with regards to the fact that there are many different students from many different backgrounds and faiths, and that we need to respect all of those. And so, why would we have one specific faith being promoted by that school when you have students from all sorts of different varieties of faiths? So, there's all kinds of arguments that Goldberg potentially could be making, but we're not told that. We're not given in this particular example what it is that Goldberg is saying. But we do know that the person that's making the argument that I just read to you is trying to refute Goldberg's argument. And he's not looking at the real argument. He's not looking at the real claims for why there should be no prayer in school. Instead, he's creating a straw man. He knows that as soon as he utters the word communist, that everybody's going to be up in arms. Everybody's going to be on his side because nobody in this country is going to like or want or support communism. And so he says, hey, look, get rid of prayer in schools. What is that? That's atheism. Atheism's what they had in Russia. That's what they had in these communist countries. Is that what you're going to want for our kids? Well, of course, Goldberg is probably not advocating atheism. Goldberg is probably not advocating communism. But what he is saying is that, we need to make sure that everybody is free in presenting their beliefs. Everybody is free to practice their beliefs, and it's not something that the school should be forcing or promoting one way or the other. So the argument that the opposition is making here is to attack Goldberg's claim, not by attacking his argument, but by making it seem more ridiculous or more extreme than what it actually is. That's what a straw man fallacy is. That's what it entails. Let's look at one other. The garment workers have signed a petition arguing for better ventilation of the work premises. Unfortunately, air conditioning is expensive. Air ducts would have to be run throughout the factory and a massive heat exchange unit installed on the roof. Also, the cost of operating such a system during the summer would be astronomical. In view of these considerations, the petition must be rejected. All right, so these garment workers have signed a petition where they're trying to get better ventilation in their facility. Again, we don't know what the argument is. There could be a lot of good reasons why better ventilation is needed. But what they've done, what the opponent has done, is instead of attacking the original argument, whatever that was, they have decided to show these people as being extremists, as being radicals, who could ultimately lead to the downfall of the whole company. Here, again, what is this? Like, if we want this ventilation, it means we're going to have air conditioning come into play. Ventilation doesn't necessarily mean air conditioning. It could mean more open windows. It could bring in greater ventilation, greater airflow. But they're saying, look, we're gonna have to put in an air conditioning system. We're gonna have this big massive unit up on the roof somewhere, and that's going to create all kinds of problems and expenses for us. That's going to drive us towards bankruptcy, and you're all going to be out of a job. Well, again, that's the extreme position. That's not necessarily what's actually being said. So the garment workers' argument that's being made there might be a very good one, but this person doesn't want to do it, so they're finding a way of attacking their opponent. That's the straw man. Actually, that is very similar also to something we're going to look at later in the course called a red herring as well, kind of guiding you off the track. But in this example, we can see it as a straw man. So we've created this argument that makes the position seem more extreme, more ridiculous than what it actually is. Okay? And that's the idea, very simply, behind a straw man. It is distorting the opponent's argument. It's creating an alternative version of the argument, one that's full of holes, one that's easy to attack, and that's what it's doing. And so anytime that a straw man is committed, it is always a fallacy. because logic demands that you attack the original argument, not a weaker, watered-down version of that argument. In fact, rather than the straw man, and this is something, again, he calls it a second deadly sin, it's something that a lot of people do commit. And students especially, you're writing papers or whatnot, you're trying to attack an opponent's position, it's very easy to sort of subtly distort things to make it easier on yourself. But that's not what you want to do. In fact, what you should be doing, if anything, is to use what's called the principle of charity. And let me give you that definition here again. The principle of charity is to strengthen your opponent's argument, strengthen your opponent's position, so that when you attack it, you're attacking the strongest version of your opponent's argument. And that actually makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Because if all you're doing is attacking a straw man, you say, hey, I've won the argument, but in reality you haven't. And anybody who really stops to evaluate it or think about it, that person's going to realize that, in fact, you have not proven anything. Instead, what you'll find is that if you use this principle of charity, instead of weakening your opponent's position, you actually end up making it a stronger view. You make it a stronger position. And so if you are able to defeat that strongest version of your opponent's argument, then you've got something, right? Then you've actually proven your case. You've actually won. So the straw man, that's going to get you into trouble. But if you use the principle of charity, that's actually a very good thing for you to do. Okay? And believe it or not, that's basically all there is to this entire chapter. So if you take a look, page 65, exercise 4-1, it says, pick out the distortion in each of the following straw man arguments. And basically what it's going to be asking you to do here is to read through what's being stated and try to find where there's a distortion that's taking place. So for example, let's look at the first one. It says the movement to allow prayer in public school classrooms is a major threat to our freedom. The advocates of prayer in school want to require every school child to participate in a Christian religious program prior to every school day. It violates the rights of those who follow other religions. It violates the rights of those who do not want their children religiously indoctrinated. And it violates our basic principle of separation of church and state. All right. So we want to look at the argument. This is kind of similar to the one that we looked at with the Goldberg claim. But the argument is trying to argue that we should not allow prayer in public schools. Why? Well, it says that the people who advocate for prayer in public schools want to require every school child to participate in a Christian religious program prior to every school day. Now, if that were the case, if it is the case that this is what they're after, then what follows would logically follow. If they really did want to force every child to participate in a Christian religious program, then that would lead to indoctrination. That would lead to violation of separation of church and state. It would lead to a violation of the rights of individuals to be able to do that. But in most cases, this is not what the people who advocate for prayer in school are after. In most cases, all they're asking for is usually a moment or two of silence in the morning where the child can utter their own prayer for their own faith or sit silently if they are agnostic or atheistic or what have you. It's not trying to indoctrinate. It's not trying to force any particular religious view. It's simply giving that child a moment of silence to be able to offer a prayer if they choose to. That's the usual claim that's being made by people who advocate for religion in schools. But this person, rather than looking at that, they want to distort it. They want to make it seem much more extreme than what it actually is, and claim that no, what we're trying to do is to indoctrinate children into a Christian way of life, into a Christian faith. And this is what something that someone who is a Jew, someone who is a Muslim, someone who is a Buddhist is not going to appreciate, obviously, nor should they. But the idea of having a moment of silence to offer your own prayer is something that anyone from any of those faiths could be acceptable, could have, as an acceptable thing. So that's the basic idea with these, is you simply want to try to find where the distortion is. What is it that makes this argument a straw man? Okay, so I did the first one there for you. You just need to do the rest of those, 2 through 5 on page 65. And that's it. Should be a fairly quick and easy week for you. So I will be back on Thursday with we'll go through the answers and take any questions that you might have.